The wind came off Hallow Moor before daylight and did not stop. It found the gaps in the shutters and moved the candle flame, and made the paste go cold in the shallow pot before Rena could use it. She worked anyway. She had 4 spines to mend, and she meant to finish them before she left the house, because if she did not finish them, her father would try, and her father's hands had begun to shake in the winter. The bindery smelled of glue and leather and old smoke. It had smelled that way all her life. She pressed the last gathering down with her thumb and counted slowly in her head until the paste took hold. Her nails were stained brown at the edges. She had scrubbed them the night before with lye until the skin around them was raw, and they were still brown, and she had decided that she did not care. Above her, Nissa coughed twice and then was quiet. Rena listened for the 3rd cough. It did not come. That was a good morning. Then she let out the breath she had been holding. Her mother's dress hung on the back of the door. It had been let out at the shoulders and taken in at the waist, and the lace at the cuff was new, and the lace was the only new thing on it. The carriage came before the light was properly up. The driver did not knock. He stood in the lane with his hat in his hands, and when Rena opened the door, he held out a folded paper. From His Grace, he said. She opened it. 3 lines, in a hand so even it might have been ruled. The service is at 10. The carriage will wait as long as you require. You need bring nothing. There was no greeting. There was no name at the end of it. Only a single letter pressed into the wax, and the wax was black. She read it twice. Then she folded it along the crease he had made and put it in her sleeve, because she did not have a pocket, and because it seemed a poor thing to leave lying on a bench. Her father came down in his good coat with his collar wrong. She fixed it without being asked. He would not look at her while she did it. You can still say no, he said. I said yes in October. You can say no this morning. I would not hold it against you. I want you to know that I would not hold it against you. There was a bottle on the shelf behind him. It had come down from the doctor at Kirkhallow in November, and it had cost 11 shillings, and it had done more for Nissa in 4 weeks than 3 years of the village man had done, and there were 2 fingers left in it, and there was no more money. Rena did not look at the bottle. She had trained herself out of looking at it. She smoothed the collar flat and stepped back. Papa, go and wake Nissa. She will not forgive either of us if she sleeps through it. Or Nissa came down wrapped in 3 shawls with her hair still in its nightplait, and she looked at Rena in the dress, and her small face did something complicated, and then settled on pride. She was 11 years old. She had spent 2 of those years in a bed. You look like a lady, she said. I look like Mama. Mama was a lady. Rena knelt down on the cold floor in her mother's dress and put her arms around her sister, and held on rather longer than she had planned to. The road to Netherbury Church runs along the bottom of the moor where the frost stays latest. The carriage was better sprung than anything Rena had ridden in, and she found she could not sit easily in it. She watched the sheep standing in the white grass with their breath showing, and the black shape of Alderham on the ridge above which she had looked at from below her whole life the way a person looks at weather. The church was full. That was the thing she had not prepared for. Netherbury had perhaps 300 souls in it, and it seemed that every one of them had found a reason to be indoors that morning. They stood when she came in. She heard the sound of it before she understood what it was. He was at the front and he did not turn around. She had seen him twice before. Once at a distance on the road with the hunt, and once in her father's shop 4 years ago buying nothing, running one finger down a row of spines and putting a book back crooked. He was taller than she remembered. His coat was black, and his hair was dark and cut close, and when she reached him and stopped beside him, he did not turn his head. The parson spoke. The words were the ordinary words. Rena heard them the way you hear rain on a roof without following any single one of them, aware only that they were still going. Then it was his turn. I will, said the Duke of Vaudrey. 1. His voice was low and even, and it went no further than the 3rd row. Rena felt the sound of it in her chest. and was surprised by that. Then it was her turn, and she said her part, and her voice carried further than his had, and she heard herself, and did not know whether to be ashamed of it. He put the ring on her finger. His hands were warm. That was the only thing she learned about him in the whole of that hour, that his hands were warm, and that there was a small white scar across the back of the left one shaped like a hook. They walked out together. The bells went. Somebody threw wheat. Old Mrs. Aldous caught at Rena's sleeve and said, "God bless you, my duck." And Rena said, "Thank you." And then the carriage door was open, and she was inside it, and he was inside it, and the door was shut. The wheels turned. The village went past the window and stopped going past. She waited. She waited the whole length of the moor road, which is 4 miles, and she was still waiting when the gates of Alderhelm came up out of the mist. He had said 2 words to her that day. He had said them to the parson, and it would be 4 months before he said anything to her at all. Alderhelm Hall is grey stone, and it faces north, which no sane man would build on purpose, and which every guide to the county apologizes for. It has 104 windows. Rena counted them from the drive on that first afternoon, because counting was something to do with her mind, while the rest of her was occupied with not being afraid. The household was drawn up on the steps. Every one of them, kitchen and stable and hall in a line, in the cold, in order of precedence. She had not known that this happened. She got down out of the carriage and stood in front of 40 people who had all been told to look at her. The housekeeper stepped forward. She was a wide, upright woman of 60, with a ring of keys at her waist and a face that gave away exactly as much as it had decided to. "Your Grace, I am Mrs. Quintrell. The house is glad." "Thank you," said Rena. "I am afraid I do not know any of your names yet." Something went along the line. Not a sound. A shift. "You will, Your Grace," said Mrs. Quintrell. The Duke had gone up the steps and into the house without stopping. Supper was at 8 in a room built to seat 40. There were 2 places laid, hers at one end and his at the other, with 15 feet of polished oak between them, and a branch of candles in the middle, so that she could see the shape of him and not his face. She had decided, in the 4 hours she had spent alone in a bedroom the size of her father's entire shop, that she would not begin badly. It cost nothing to be pleasant. "The soup is very good," she said. 2 footmen stood against the wall. Neither of them moved. The Duke ate. He did not look up. "I have never had white soup before. We are not soup people. My father's notion of a Sunday dinner is a pie and an argument." The clock in the corner ticked. "There was a hard frost this morning," she said. He set down his spoon. He wiped his mouth. He rose, and he inclined his head to her, which was courteous, which was the terrible part, and he walked the length of the room and out. Rena sat alone at a table laid for 40, with 2 footmen watching the wall behind her. She finished her soup. She finished all of it, slowly, and she asked for more, and she ate that too, because leaving it would have looked like something, and she was not going to look like anything on her first night. Then she went and found his study. It took her the better part of half an hour, and she opened 3 wrong doors doing it, and behind one of them was a corridor in the north wing with a door at the end of it that was locked. She rattled the handle without thinking. It did not give. She went on. The study door was ajar. He was at the desk with a ledger open and a lamp low, and he looked up when she came in, and she saw his face, properly for the first time that day. He was not old. She had somehow expected him to be old. He was perhaps 32. His eyes were a pale color she could not name in that light, and they were not cold, which unsettled her far more than cold would have. "Your Grace," she said, "I would like to know what I have done." He did not answer. "We were married this morning. I understand that this is an arrangement. I am not a fool, and I have not come here expecting to be courted. But you have not spoken to me. Not on the road, not at the table, not once. and I find I would rather be told the reason than spend the next 40 years inventing one." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took up his pen. She watched him write. It took no time at all. He blotted it and turned the paper and slid it across the desk toward her, and he sat back, and he waited. She came forward and picked it up. "You have done nothing. It is not you. You will want for nothing here. Ask Quintrell for anything at all, and it will be got for you." She read it twice. Her ears had begun to ring. Ask Quintrell, not ask me. He had thought about that sentence. He had chosen it. A man does not write a sentence like that by accident, and he had written it in front of her, in her hearing, at the speed of ordinary handwriting on the evening of his wedding. She set the paper down on the desk and pushed it back to him with 2 fingers the way you return a plate you have not ordered. "I can read," she said. "That was not what I asked." Something moved behind his eyes. It was there, and then it was not. He rose. He came around the end of the desk and stopped, with the width of the hearthrug between them, and he stood looking at her with the lamp behind him, and Rena watched his jaw and saw it work once. He was going to speak. She was as certain of it as she had ever been of anything. He did not. He went back around the desk and sat down and picked up the pen again. "No," said Rena. "No, thank you." She turned and walked out, and shut the door behind her quietly, because slamming it would have been a sentence, and she was not going to give him a sentence he could keep. She got up to her room before her hands began to shake. That was the part she was proud of afterwards. She got all the way up 2 flights and along the gallery and inside with the door shut, and she stood with her back against it in her mother's dress, and only then did she come apart, and she did it standing up without a sound for about the length of time it takes to boil a kettle. Then she stopped and washed her face and went to bed. She had been married for 1 day. She did not yet know that she was carrying his child, and she would not know it for another 5 weeks, and by then she would have made a decision about him that she would spend the rest of that winter regretting. The house had rules and nobody wrote them down. Rena learned them the way you learn a language, by getting things wrong in front of people too well trained to laugh. Breakfast came up on a tray. Luncheon did not exist. The Duke rode out at first light and came back after dark, and the household arranged itself around his absence with the smoothness of long practice. He dined at 8, and she dined at 8, at opposite ends of the oak table for 6 days, before she understood that nothing was going to alter on its own. Mrs. Quintrell gave her the keys on the 4th day, all of them but one. "That will be the north corridor," Rena said. "That one is not used, Your Grace." Not used or not opened. Mrs. Quintrell looked at her, and Rena understood that the woman had decided something about her, that it was not unfavorable, and that it would make no difference whatever to what she was prepared to say. "There is coal in the small parlor," said Mrs. Quintrell. "If you mean to sit anywhere of a morning, sit there." She found the library on the 9th day, and it saved her. 1,100 books, none touched in years, 200 of them dying, damp along the north wall, boards warped, spines gone to powder at head and tail where the leather had dried out and given up. Rena stood in the cold with her breath showing, and felt her hands begin to want something for the first time since October. She sent to Netherbry for her father's spare tools. She had paste made in the still room. She took an apron off a hook in the kitchen and put it on over a gown that had cost more than the bindery took in a year, and she began at the north wall and worked along it, a duchess in an apron with glue drying on her knuckles. Ward went down to the village inside a week and came back up again, and Rena heard the shape of it in the way the housemaid stopped talking. When she came round a corner, she did not care. When her hands were busy, she was not counting the days. She asked Mrs. Quintrell about him once. Only once. Was he always so? The housekeeper was checking linen and did not stop. "No, Your Grace." "Then what happened to him?" "The late Duchess died." "I know that." "Much when?" 4 years ago this October. In childbed. The child went with her." Mrs. Quintrell folded a sheet in half, and then in half again, and set it down square. He was never a talkative man. He was not that before, and I would not have you think it. But he was not this. He has not been the same since, and I do not expect he will be, and there is no good at all in the house wishing it. Grief then. Rena turned it over that night by the fire, and found that it fitted, and was almost glad of it, because grief has a shape, and she could work with a shape. A man buries his wife and his child. He shuts his mouth. 4 years on, his lawyers, and his tenants and his fathers will all require an heir of him, and so he writes to a bookbinder in Netherbury, and marries the daughter and cannot bear the sight of her because she is the proof of what he has agreed to. It fitted. She believed it for 5 weeks. It was wrong. The offer had come in September, and it had not come from him. A man named Halvard had ridden down to the shop, a spare grey man of 50 who was steward at Alderhelm and had been steward there under the old Duke, and he had waited while her father finished a customer, and then asked whether there was somewhere they might sit. The terms were plain and generous, and there was not one word in them about affection. The Duke of Vaudrey required a wife, healthy, of good character, unconnected to any family with an interest in his estate. He had asked in the parish. The parish had given 3 names, and hers was one of them. The settlement would clear the bindery's debts entirely. What? There would be an annuity for her father, and provision, separate and permanent, for her sister's care. Her father had put both hands flat on the table, and had not been able to speak for some while. Rena had said no. She had said it in front of Halvard that same afternoon, without leaving the room to think. She had said that she would not be chosen off a list of 3 by a man who had not troubled to look at any of them, that she was not a heifer at the Michaelmas fair, and that she would thank him to carry that back exactly as she had said it. Halvard had written it down. He had asked her to repeat the middle part so as to get the words right. She had liked him for that. Then October came, and Nyssa got worse. It was not dramatic. That was what nobody understood who had not sat up with her. It was a cough that changed its sound in the 2nd week and did not change back. The doctor from Kirkhallow came because Rena walked 11 miles in the rain to fetch him and would not leave his step, and he left a bottle behind him and said that with care and warmth and sea air in the summer, there was every reason to hope. Care and warmth and sea air. 11 shillings, the bottle she had written the acceptance herself, on the good paper, in her best hand, and walked it up to Alderhelm and given it to Halvard at the door, and had not gone in. She had never once met the man she was marrying. She had thought she did not need to. She had thought she knew exactly what she was buying and what she was paying, and that there was a dignity in doing the arithmetic with your eyes open. She had been wrong about that too, but it took her until February to find out. In the middle of February, she was on the library steps with a headband in one hand, when the room went sideways. She came down carefully. She was proud of that afterwards, that she came down the steps one at a time holding the rail, and sat on the second from the bottom with her head against the wood, until the grayness went off. Then she counted back. She counted back again more slowly and got the same answer. And then she sat there a long while in the cold with her hands flat on her knees and the strip of leather still between her fingers. Mrs. Quintrell found her an hour later, took one look at her face, and asked nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer. "I will send to Kirkhallow," she said. "Not the village, Kirkhallow." "Not yet, Your Grace." Rena put her hand flat on the apron, over the glue stains, and left it there. "I will tell you when, and I will tell him when. He must be told." "He will be told," said Rena, "on the day he asks me a question. It took 2 days." She never learned who carried it. Mrs. Quintrell would not have, but there had been a housemaid on the gallery stair that afternoon, and there was a still-room woman who had been asked for a particular tea, and the house had 40 pairs of eyes in it, and 6 weeks of nothing to look at but her. On the Thursday evening, a footman came to the morning room and said that His Grace asked whether Her Grace would come to the small parlor and would come now, The fire had been built up. That was the first thing she noticed, and she noticed it because it was February and nobody had built up a fire for her since she arrived. There were 2 chairs turned toward it. There was a glass of something amber on the table by the far one. Untouched, he was standing. He did not sit when she came in, and he did not gesture her to a chair, and she understood after a moment that he had not thought of it, that he had not the least idea how to begin, and that all of the ordinary machinery a man uses to open a conversation was simply not available to him. He held out a folded paper. Rena looked at it. She did not take it. "It is true," she said. "If that is what the paper is for. Yes, I am with child. I have known for 2 days, and I was not going to tell you until you asked me, which I am aware was childish, and I find that I do not much care." His hand did not move. The paper stayed where it was. She took it. It was not 3 lines this time. It was a full page, close written, both sides, and she stood in front of the fire and read it while he watched her read it. Farrow House in Dorset was hers from the 20th of this month. It was warm. It was 3 miles from the sea. There was a physician of the first standing at Weymouth who had attended 2 duchesses and would attend her from the 4th month onward, and would be resident in the house from the 8th. Her father and her sister were to be moved there in April at his charge, and there was a paragraph about the sea air and a paragraph about a mare quiet enough for a woman in her condition, and a paragraph about the household she was to have and what it would cost and who would be in it. Her own income was named. It was obscene. There was 1 line at the bottom, in the same ruled hand. "You are not to remain at Alderhelm. Say what you require, and it will be added." Renner read the last line 4 times. Then she folded the paper along the crease he had made, because she was not going to let her hands do anything else, and she looked up at him. "No," she said. He went very still. "I want to be certain I have understood it, so I'm going to say it back to you, and you may write to me if I have any of it wrong." Her voice was perfectly level, and she was aware of it being level in the way you are aware of carrying something full to the brim. "You have married me in January. You have not spoken 1 word to me in 6 weeks. You have now discovered that I am carrying your child, and your response, within 2 days, is a house in Dorset, a doctor from Weymouth, a quiet mare, and my father and my sister packed off 200 miles at your charge, so that all 3 of us are somewhere else by the spring." He did not move. "It is very well done," she said. "I can see that it is well done, and I would like that said. There is not a hard word in it anywhere. There is not 1 thing in that page a magistrate would call unkind. You have been more generous to me on that paper than you have been in this house since the day I came, and I have not been in a room with you since the church, and now I have been in a room with you for 4 minutes, and I am being sent to the sea." She held the page out to him. He did not take it. "I will not go," said Rena. Something happened in his face. It was small, and it went through fast, and she could not read it at all. He moved toward the writing table by the window, and she heard the small sound of the drawer, and something in her that had been holding on very tightly since January let go all at once. "No," she said. "Put it down." His hand stopped on the drawer. "Put it down, or I will walk out of this room, and you may send a page after me by a footman, which is very nearly what you have been doing since January." She had not raised her voice. She discovered that she was not going to be able to keep it low much longer, and so she said the rest of it quickly. "I have a great deal of practice at reading your handwriting. I know the loop you put on a letter D. I know that you press harder at the end of a line when you are being kind, and I know that you have been kind on paper to me in your way every single time. I do not want it. I would rather you were cruel out loud." He let go of the drawer. "I have not asked you for anything," she said. "I want you to think about that, because I have had a good deal of time to think about it. I did not ask why you would not eat at my end of the table. I did not ask why the north corridor is locked. I did not ask why my letters to Netherbury go down in your own groom's hand and cost my father nothing, and why the household was told not to mention it to me, which I did not mind, and which they all minded very much on my behalf, which was worse. I have not once asked you for a single thing, and you have decided that the safest place in England for me is anywhere at all that is not within reach of your voice." She put her hand flat below her ribs. She had not planned to. It was the first time she had done it in front of anybody, and she saw him see it, and she saw what it cost him, and she did not stop. "There is a third person in this room," she said, "and it will be born in October, and it will spend its whole life in a house where its mother is spoken to on paper. I did not agree to that. I agreed to be your wife and to give you an heir, and I have not complained of the bargain once, and I will not complain of it now. But that child is going to learn what a marriage is by watching this one. So I'm going to be very careful about what I let it watch." She stepped forward and put the folded page down on the table beside the untouched glass. "So here is what I require, since you have invited me to say it. I require to be told to go. Not written. Told. If you will stand in this room and say to me with your own mouth, 'Rena, go to Dorset,' then I will be in the carriage before the light on Saturday, and you will never have to look at me again. And I will not make one scene about it, and I will raise your child to think well of you, which I would do in any case, because I am not a small woman. That is my whole condition. 6 words. You have already said 2 words to me this year, and you said those to the parson. The fire spat. Neither of them looked at it." He stood with the width of the hearthrug between them, exactly as he had stood in the study on her wedding night, and Rena watched his jaw and saw it work, and saw his chest fill, and stood there in front of him with her heart going like a bird in a box and waited to be sent away. He turned his head aside. He crossed to the table and took up the folded page, and Rena's stomach dropped through the floor because she thought that he was going to write on it. He put it in the fire. He held it down with the poker until the last of it went, both sides, all of that arithmetic, the quiet mare and the sea air and the physician who had attended 2 duchesses, and he stood over it until there was nothing left that could be read. Then he set the poker back on its rest, and he went out, and he shut the door with great care. Rena stood by the fire in the small parlor for some while. She could not have said what she had won, or whether she had won anything at all, and she was later very glad that she did not know, because if she had understood on that night what she had just done to him, she would not have had the courage to see the rest of it through. She got as far as the gallery. She sat down on the window seat at the turn of the stair with her back against the cold shutter and her hands over her mouth, and shook for a long time, and the moon came up over Hallow Moor and went behind the cloud again, and a clock somewhere below struck 11, and nobody came, because nobody in that house would have dared. Then she went to bed, and slept better than she had slept since October, which made no sense to her at all. Nothing happened for 9 days. On the 10th, she came down to the library, and there were 4 men in it with ladders and a horsehair barrow, and the whole of the north wall was open to the stone, and the damp course was being cut out and replaced. "Whose order?" she said. The foreman took his hat off. "His Grace's, your Grace. Wednesday. For what reason?" The man looked, briefly, like someone being asked to spell a word he had only ever heard. "For the damp, your Grace." They were 9 days at it. They put in a new course and lime plaster, and a stove flue where there had never been one, and when they had gone, the room was warm for the first time in 50 years, and the books along that wall stopped dying. There was no note with it. Nothing was said. He did not appear. That was the first of them. In March, a case came up from Netherby with her father's second set of tools in it, the fine ones, the ones he had not been able to part with in November when the debt was worst, and which Rena knew for a certainty had been sold. In March, a chair appeared in the library, a good one, with arms set square in front of the new stove. In March, the bookseller at Kirkhollow sent up 24 sheets of goatskin and a case of gold leaf, unasked and unbilled. Not one of them came with a word. She understood what he was doing, and it made her angrier than the page in the fire had. He would give her a warm room, a chair, a trade, and the tools out of her father's shop, bought back out of a stranger's hands, and he would not give her 4 minutes and his own voice, and there was no arrangement of those facts that Rena could make sense of. She stopped waiting for him at 8 o'clock. She had the morning room table laid at 7 instead, and ate alone and did not go down. And in the last week of March, sitting in the good chair in the warm library, with a broken quarto open across her knees and her hand moving and her mind somewhere else entirely, Rena began, without in the least meaning to sing. Halvard came up to the library on the second Tuesday in April with a list of the home farm rents in his hand, because that was the day he brought them, and he found the Duchess of Vaudrey up a ladder with a bone folder in her teeth. He waited at the bottom until she came down. "I am not going to ask you to sit," Rena said, taking the folder out of her mouth, "because I have learned that nobody in this house will sit in front of me, and I have stopped finding it charming. But I am going to ask you something else, and you may refuse me, and I will not hold it against you or mention it again." Halvard set the rent list down on the corner of the table. "You brought my refusal back to him in September," she said. "In my own words, I have always wondered what he did with it." The steward looked at the window for a moment. "He asked me to say it again," he said. "I said it. He asked me to say it a third time, and I said I was not a strolling player, and he apologized, which is a thing I have heard him do twice in 22 years. Then he sat down. Then he said, 'That is the one.'" Rena put her hand on the back of the good chair. "That is not the same," she said, "as saying that he liked me. No, Your Grace, I did not say it was. He chose me off a list. He chose you off a list of 3, and the other 2 said yes at once." Halvard picked his hat up off the table and turned it round in his hands. "I am not a clever man, and I will not pretend to know what is in him. But I will tell you a thing you can do what you like with. He rides to Netherby of a Friday. He has done since before Christmas. He goes down the back lane, and he stops at the top of your father's yard, and he sits there on the horse for a quarter of an hour, and then he comes home. He has never once gone in. He does not know that I know it." Rena did not say anything for a moment. "Mrs. Quintrell says, 'It is grief,'" she said. "Mrs. Quintrell is a good woman, and she has been in this house 40 years. That is not an answer, Halvard." "No." He looked at his hat. "It is not grief, Your Grace. I have seen him grieve. He grieved 11 months without a word to any living soul, and then one morning he came down and asked me about the drains at Cowless, and that was the end of it. And he was quiet after, but he was in the world. He talked to his tenants. He talked to his horses. He talked to me." Halvard raised his eyes. "He talks to everyone in this county but you. That is not grief. Grief does not choose." The stove ticked. Somewhere below, a door closed and a dog was let out. "Then what is it? That is not mine to say, and if I could say it, I would not, because it would come out wrong from me, and it would sit in you crooked for the rest of your life." "Halvard, ask him," said the steward. "He will not answer you, but you should ask him, and you should keep asking him, and you should not do it kindly, because everybody in this house has been kind to that man for 4 years, and it has not done him one particle of good." He put his hat on. He picked up the rent list and put it back in his coat, having entirely forgotten what he came for. At the door he stopped. "There was a nursery got ready once," he said, without turning round. "It is at the end of the north corridor. That is all I will tell you, and I have told you more than I should, and I would take it as a kindness if you did not say where it came from." Then he went out, and Rena stood in the warm library with the bone folder in her hand for a long time. She did not ask him. She meant to. She went so far as to stand outside the study door twice that week with her hand up, and both times she thought about the page burning in the small parlor and the way he had held it down with the poker, and both times she went away again. She told herself it was because she was tired. She was 3 months gone by then, and she was tired a great deal of the time, and it was a very good excuse, and she knew exactly what it was worth. Instead, on the last Thursday in April, in the warm library, with the stove drawing and the rain coming across Hallow Moor in long gray sheets, she sang. She did not decide to. Her mother had sung at her work all her life, at the sewing and at the fire and going up the stairs, and the song was one Rena had known before she knew what songs were. It was called The Weaver's Waking, and nobody outside Three Valleys had ever heard of it. Her mother had sung it to her, and to Nyssa, and Rena had not sung it since the funeral, and it came up out of her that afternoon while her hands were busy with a broken quarto. She sang it quietly. She sang it to her lap, which is to say she sang it to the child, and she did not think of it as singing to the child until about the third verse, when she understood what she was doing and her voice went unsteady, and she made herself go on. She had got to the end of it before she heard the sound. It was very small. It was the sound a floorboard makes under a man who has been standing on it long enough to have stopped thinking about it and has just shifted his weight. Rena's head came up. The library door was open. It had been shut when she came in. She was certain of that, because the stove smoked when the door was open, and she always shut it. There was nobody there. She got up, which took her longer than it once had, and went out into the passage. It was empty at both ends. She stood there a while, and then she went back in and she sat down, and she found that her hands were not steady enough to work with gold leaf, and she put it away. The next day the stove had been lit before she came down. It had never been lit before she came down. She asked the housemaid, and the housemaid said without meeting her eye that His Grace had given the order on his way out at first light. Rena sat down in the good chair and looked at the fire for a while. Then she thought very clearly. All right, she sang on the Friday. She sang on the Saturday. She did not look at the door, not once. And she did not sing loudly. And she did not sing anything she did not want to sing, because that would have been a performance, and she had no intention of performing for him. She sang what her mother had sung. She sang the weaving psalm, and the one about the 2 boats, and the long, slow one for a child who will not settle. And she sang them to her lap in the warm room, with the rain going over. And every one of those afternoons the door was open when she looked up and there was nobody in the passage. On the Wednesday of the following week it rained so hard that the men could not get up onto the moor, and the house went quiet in the particular way a house does when everybody in it has been driven indoors. And Rena was halfway through the second verse when the door opened all the way. He came in. She stopped. He stood just inside the door with the rain still on the shoulders of his coat and his hair wet at the front, and he had come straight up without going to his room, and he did not have anything in his hands. That was the thing she noticed. That was the thing she would remember about it for the rest of her life. Longer than the words, longer than anything. His hands were empty. No paper, no pen, nothing to hide behind. The stove ticked. The rain went along the window in a rush, and eased and came again. Do not stop. It was 3 words, and it was barely above the rain, and his voice came out wrong, low and dragged, like a gate that has not been opened in a season. And Rena sat in the good chair with her hands on a broken quarto, and looked at him, and could not speak at all. Her eyes went, and she was furious about it, and she let them go anyway, because holding them would have taken attention she did not have to spare. 17 weeks. She had counted them without meaning to. The way you count stairs. In the dark. 17 weeks of a house arranging itself around a hole where a voice should be, a footman who looked at the wall, of a woman at the wrong end of an oak table saying that the soup was very good, and it turned out that all of it could be undone by 3 words spoken badly by a wet man standing in a doorway, and Rena found that she resented that more than she could easily say, and that she would have given a year of her life to hear it again. He did not come toward her. He did not say anything else. He stood exactly where he was, as though the floor beyond a certain point were water. Say it again, she said. Do not stop. That is not what I meant. She put the quarto down on the table beside her, very carefully, because her hands wanted to shake, and she was not going to let them do it in front of him. Say anything. Say the rent. Say the weather. I do not care what you say. I have been in this house 17 weeks, and I have heard your voice for 4 seconds, and I would like to hear whether I imagined it. He was quiet so long that she thought it had gone. You sing flat on the turn, he said. In the third line. Every time, Rena made a sound that was half of a laugh and entirely undignified. I know I do, she said. My mother did. It is not flat. It is how it goes in Netherbury. It is how it goes in Netherbury, Your Grace. And if you had ever come inside my father's shop instead of sitting at the top of the yard on a horse for a quarter of an hour, somebody would have told you. His face changed. Poor. She had not known that it could do that. Halvard, he said. Halvard is a good man in a difficult position, and I would take it very ill if anything came of that. Nothing will come of it. He crossed the room then, not to her. He went to the north wall, the wall he had opened to the stone and closed up again, and he put his hand flat against the new plaster the way a man does when he is checking that a thing is taken, and he stood with his back to her. I did not know your voice, he said. Until Thursday. I have been married to you since January, and I did not know what my wife's voice sounded like when she was not angry with me. That is what I have made, and I would rather say so out loud than have you work it out, then unmake it. It is not that simple. It is exactly that simple. You are doing it now. I am doing it now because there is a door and a hearthrug between us, and I am not looking at you. He said it without any self-pity whatever, as a man reads a figure off a page. You may think that is nothing. It is not nothing. It has taken me 4 years to be able to do this much. Rena sat forward in the chair. Will you tell me why? He did not turn round. No. Will you ever? The rain went along the glass. His hand was still flat on the wall. Ask me in October, said the Duke of Vaudrey. October was when the child was due, and they both knew it, and Rena understood in that moment that whatever the thing was, it had a date on it, and that the date was the same as her child's, and something went through her that was not fear exactly, but was closely related to it. He took his hand off the wall and turned round. May I ask you something, he said. She had told Mrs. Quintrell in February that he would be told on the day he asked her a question. She had been angry when she said it, and she had meant it to be a small private cruelty, and she had never once expected to be standing in it. Yes, she said. What is it called? What called? The song. He looked, briefly, like a man who has stepped onto ice and is listening for it. The one from Thursday. Not the boats. The other. The weaver's waking. The weaver's waking, he said. She said it again for him slowly, the way you give a stranger the name of a place. The weaver's waking, he said, and she heard him put it somewhere, the way a man puts away a thing he means to keep. He inclined his head, and he went out, and the door clicked shut behind him. And Rena sat in the good chair in the warm library, and put both hands flat over her face, and laughed until she had to stop because it was hurting the child. What followed was the strangest 6 weeks of her life. He spoke, but he spoke like a man rationing water. Never at table. Never in the hall, never on the stairs, never in front of a servant, and never, not once, anywhere, in the house except the library. She worked out the rule inside a fortnight, and never once said it aloud, because she had a suspicion that if she named it, he would not be able to go on. So she stayed in the library. She had her dinner brought there. She was there at 4 every afternoon, and he came up at 4 or he did not, and on the days he did, he would take the ladder from her without being asked, because she was 5 months gone and could no longer be trusted on it, and he would fetch down whatever she pointed at, and hand it over and sit in the chair opposite with his boots to the stove. On the second Friday, a footman came in with the lamps while he was in the middle of a sentence about the cowlus drains, and the sentence simply stopped in the middle of a word, and did not start again until the man had gone out and the door was shut. Neither of them remarked on it. Rena sat there, with her hands still, and did not fill the gap, because she had understood by then that filling it for him was the one thing she must never do. And when the latch went, he picked the word up again, exactly where he had dropped it. He knew the books. That was the surprise. He knew where a thing was on 1,100 shelves without looking, because he had been a boy in that room with a tutor who let him alone, and he told her that his father had never read one of them and had bought 200 more by the yard for the look of it. And Rena said that she had rebound 4 of the 200, and they were the worst-made books she had ever had in her hands, and he laughed. It was not much of a laugh. It came out of him sideways, and it surprised him more than it surprised her. But she had it, and she kept it, and she took it out and looked at it that night when she was going to sleep. He said her name for the first time in the last week of May. He said it plainly, in the middle of a sentence about a gutter over the West Range, as if he had been saying it for years, and Rena had to go and stand at the window and pretend to look at something. And still there were things she could not have. He would not speak of the late Duchess. He would not speak of the North Corridor. Twice she got close, and both times she watched him go gray and still, and both times she stopped, and both times she hated herself for stopping, and could not have done otherwise. She was in love with him by the middle of June. She knew the exact afternoon. He was on the ladder, with a folio under one arm, saying something perfectly ordinary about lime plaster, and she looked up at him and thought, oh, and then thought, well, that is inconvenient. She did not tell him. He had told her to ask him in October, and she had made a private bargain with herself that she would ask for nothing before then, and she meant to keep it, and she was rather proud of keeping it. She kept it until the 9th of July, which was the day the carriage came up the drive with the Marchmont arms on the panel. Lady Adeline Marchmont was 43, the elder sister of the late Duchess of Vaudrey, and she arrived with 2 maids, a manservant, 11 trunks, and no invitation. She was in the small parlor with the tea already poured when Rena was sent for. "Sit down," she said. Rena sat mostly because standing had become an undertaking. Lady Adeline looked at her a while over the cup. She was handsome in the way of a well-kept knife. "You are further along than I was told." "October," said Rena. "October." Lady Adeline set the cup down. "Then we have 3 months in which to be honest with one another, and I would rather spend them so. You will find I am not cruel. You may find I am not kind either. I have not the time. I have never been much good at the other way myself." "No, I did not think you would be." Lady Adeline folded her hands. "You will know that I have a place in this. Under the late Duke's will I am a trustee of the Vaudrey settled estate along with my brother-in-law, and I have been so for 19 years, and there is not a shilling that moves in this county without my signature beside his. I mention it so that you understand at the outset that I am not a visiting relation to be managed with a good dinner. I had not proposed to manage you. You are the first person in this house in 4 years who has not." Something moved at the corner of the woman's mouth and went again. "Very well, I shall say what I came to say. Do you know why he married you? He required an heir. He required a wife by the 14th of March last, and a son of that marriage. Fail of either, and the Kirkhallow lands and the Cowless lands and the whole of the northern rental go to a cousin in Antigua whom he has never met on the day the first child is born. That is the codicil my father-in-law left him. It is a spiteful document, and I told the old man so to his face the year he wrote it." Lady Adeline picked up her cup again. "He was married in January. He had 9 weeks left of the first condition, and he has 1 attempt at the second. Hold both of those in your mind, because everything else I have to say depends upon them." Rena did not move. "He did not choose you," said Lady Adeline. "He chose a date. The parish gave him 3 names, and 2 of them were the daughters of men he does business with, and he took the 3rd because the 3rd was the one whose family could not make trouble for him afterward, and whose sister is dying, and who would therefore be, forgive me, grateful." That is not romance, Duchess. That is the purchase of 9 weeks. I am aware, said Rena, of what I was bought for. I did the arithmetic in October. I did it with my eyes open, and I would do it again in the morning. Then you are cleverer than I feared, and this will go quicker. Lady Adeline set the cup down again. Now, he has begun to speak to you. Who told you that? Duchess, there are 40 servants in this house, and one of them writes to me on the 1st of the month, and has done since before you were married. And I make no apology for it whatever. Yes. He has begun to speak to you, in one room, at 1 hour, and not elsewhere, and you have begun to build something on it. I have not built anything. You are 6 months gone, and you have been living on 4 o'clock in the afternoon since April, and you will forgive me for saying that it is written on you. The older woman's voice did not soften and did not sharpen. So let me put the last piece on the table, since nobody in this house will do it, and you will not thank me now and may thank me in a year. He is not silent from grief. You have worked that much out. It is not grief. I know it is not. Do you know what it is? No, neither do I, said Lady Adeline, and I have asked him to his face for 4 years. The fire moved. Outside, one of the Marchmont horses was being walked up and down. But I know what happened, she said. I know what was said in this house on the 11th of January 4 years ago, because my sister wrote to me the next morning, and I have that letter, and I have never shown it to a living soul. And I will tell you this much and no more. He said a thing to her that he cannot unsay. She was carrying his child at the time, and she had been told by 2 physicians in London that she must not, and she did it anyway, and she did it because of what he said to her, and she was dead within the year and the child with her. Rena's hands had gone very cold in her lap. You are telling me he killed her. I am telling you that he thinks he did, said Lady Adeline, which for our purposes is a great deal worse because a man who has done a thing may be forgiven, and a man who has decided about himself cannot be reached at all. You are carrying a child. You will be brought to bed in October, in this house, in the same month, in very likely the same room. And whatever he has managed with you between 4 and 6 in the afternoon in a library. I have watched him for 4 years, and I am telling you what I know. He will go under. And you will be in a bed in a house in the north, with a newborn and a husband who has stopped speaking again, and there will be nobody at all to help you, because the servants will not cross him and I shall be in London. She said it flatly. There was no relish in it anywhere, and that was what made it terrible. So I make you an offer, and it is serious, and it is not made unkindly. Come to Marchmont for your confinement, my physicians, my house, my staff. Bring your sister. The air is better in Kent, and she may have it as long as she likes. Be brought to bed somewhere that is not the room my sister died in, and if in the spring you wish to come back to him, come back to him, and I shall never say another word about it as long as I live. Rena sat with her cold hands in her lap and looked at the fire, and understood that the woman meant every word, and that the offer was generous, and that if she took it, she would never see the inside of that library at 4 o'clock again. May I ask you one thing? She said. Before I answer, you may. The child, said Rena, the first one. Whose idea was it? Lady Adeline Marchmont did not move at all, and it was the not moving that told Rena everything. I beg your pardon. You said 2 physicians in London told her she must not. Physicians in London are expensive and they are not fetched by accident, so somebody took her there, and somebody sat with her while she was told, and somebody brought her home again. You have her letters. You have kept them 19 years, and you have shown them to nobody. You said the 14th of March and 9 weeks without once looking at a paper. You know this family better than he does. Rena's voice was perfectly quiet. There was a codicil for him. Was there something for her? Did somebody tell your sister that a duchess who does not give a duke a son is nothing at all in this county? And if somebody did, my lady, was it a physician in London who told her, or was it somebody who loved her? The clock ticked 11 times before either of them spoke. You are not. said Lady Adeline at last. "What I was told you were. No, people generally are not." Rena put her hands on the arms of the chair and got herself out of it, which took a moment and which she did without help. "I will not come to Kent. I thank you for the offer, and I mean the thanks, because I do not think you had to make it. But I was brought here to have this child, and I am going to have it here, in this house, in whichever room they put me in. And if he goes under in October, then I will be here when he does, because that is what I understood myself to be agreeing to in a shop in Netherbury, and I have never once tried to get out of it." She got as far as the door. "Duchess," Rena stopped. "He has never told you what he said to her?" "No." "He will not." Lady Adeline was looking at the fire and nodded her. "Ask him anyway." Rena asked him on the 11th of July. She did it badly. She had meant to wait for October, and she had meant to be gentle, and in the event she did it in the library, at 4:10, with the window open and the Swifts going about outside. And she said, "What did you say to her?" And she watched the whole of it close. He did not answer. He did not write. He got up out of the chair and stood a moment as if he were listening for something in another part of the house, and then he said, in a voice she had not heard since January, that he hoped she would excuse him. And that was the last thing the Duke of Vaudreuil said to his wife for 6 weeks. It was worse the second time. That was the part she had not been prepared for. In the winter, she had not known what she was missing, and now she knew exactly, down to the shape of his voice on her name, and the sideways laugh, and the way he said the word plaster, and the silence came down over all of it like a sheet over furniture in a house that is being shut up. He did not come to the library at 4. He came at 7 in the morning instead, before she was down, and she knew he had been because the stove was lit, and there would be a book left out on the table, opened at something he thought she would want, and never a word on it anywhere. That was the whole of their marriage in August. A warm stove and an open book, and a man who arranged his day so as not to meet her on a stair. Rena stopped singing. She did not decide that either. She sat down in the good chair one afternoon in the middle of August with her hands on the great weight of the child, and opened her mouth and found that there was nothing in her to do it with, and she sat there in the silence, with the Swifts going about outside, and she thought, so that is what he has been living in. She was very large by then, and she slept badly, and the heat sat over Hallow Moor for 3 weeks without moving. Her ankles swelled. The child turned in the night and woke her. Lady Adeline stayed, and did not mention Kent again, and had her own physician up from Kirkhollow twice without asking anyone's leave, and was in her hard way a comfort, and Rena could not have said which of them was more surprised by it. Nissa's letters came up from Netherbury every week, in a round unformed hand. Rena answered every one of them, and did not put a single true thing in any of them. On the last day of August she went to Mrs. Quentrell and asked for the key to the north corridor. The housekeeper looked at her for a long moment. "I cannot give you that, Your Grace. I know you cannot. I am asking you to." "There is one key, and he has it." "That is not true," said Rena, "because you gave me every key in this house on my 4th day, and you did not have to search for one of them, and a woman who has run a house 40 years does not have a lock in it she cannot open. I'm not going to ask again, and I am not going to be angry with you, and if you say no to me, I shall go back upstairs, and that will be the end of it." Mrs. Quentrell stood with her hands folded in front of her apron. "He is a cowless until dark," she said. It was a nursery. That was all it was, and it was the worst thing Rena had ever walked into. A nursery, finished, complete, ready. A cot with the covers turned down. A nursing chair by the fireplace with a cushion in it. A rug. A painted horse on a shelf with the paint still perfect because no hand had ever taken it down. Little clothes folded in a press and tissue that had gone brown at the folds. Everything ready and nothing used, and 4 years of dust lying over all of it as fine and even as flour. There was a second door at the far end, and it stood open, and beyond it was a bedroom, and the bed in the bedroom was stripped to the frame. Rena stood in the middle of the nursery, in the last of the light, with her hands under the weight of her own child, and she did not cry because it was not that kind of feeling. It was more like being told a fact. She was still standing there when she heard him on the corridor. He stopped in the doorway. He had come straight up from the yard again, and there was dust on him from the ride, and he looked at his wife standing in the middle of that room. And Rena saw a man arrive at the end of something. "I asked her for it," she said. "Do not go down and speak to Quintrell." I was not going to speak to Quintrell. He came in. It was, she understood, the first time he had been through that door in 4 years, and he did it in 3 steps, like a man going into water, and then he stood in the middle of the floor with his hat in his hand and looked at the cot. "Her name was Izora," he said. "I know. She was 27. She had been told in London twice, by 2 different men, that her heart would not carry a child, and she wanted one, and I said no to her for 2 years. His voice was quite level. "I want you to know that. That I said no for 2 years. I have gone over it a great many times, and that is the only part of it I can stand." Corvin, he had never heard her say it. She saw it go through him. "On the 11th of January, he said, "we quarreled about a thing so small that I cannot now remember the beginning of it. Something about her sister, something about a visit. And in the middle of it she said to me that I did not want a child by her, and I said, because I wanted to hurt her, and I did want to hurt her, that a house with nothing in it is not a house, it is a monument, and that I had married a woman and got a marble hall. The Swifts went about outside, downstairs, a door shut. She was carrying within the month, he said. She never told me she had stopped taking what the London men gave her. She never said one word about it. She was dead before the year was out, and the boy with her, and she was 2 days about it, and on the second morning she was clear for about a quarter of an hour, and she took hold of my hand and she said, 'There, now it is a house.'" Rena put her hand out and took hold of the back of the nursing chair. "That is what I said to her," said the Duke of Vaudrey. "That is what my mouth is for, so I stopped it. I stood in the churchyard at Netherbury in the November, and I gave my word to a woman who was under the ground that I would never again say a thing to a wife that I could not take back, and there is no way to keep a promise like that except one. And I found that I could keep it, and I have kept it for 4 years. And then you married me, and then I married you, because of a codicil in 9 weeks off a list of 3. He looked at the cot. "And I decided in December that I would not speak to you until the child was born and you were both up and well, because I had worked out that if I did not speak to you, I could not say anything to you, and if I could not say anything to you, then nothing that happened in October would be my doing." He stopped. "I knew what that was. I want you to understand that I have known the whole time exactly what that was. It is not reasoning. It is the thing a man does when he cannot bear a thing, and I am not a fool and I could not stop. And then you sat in my library in April and sang to a child that has not been born yet, and I have not been able to hold the line since." Rena stood holding the back of a chair in a room full of 4-year-old dust. "Come here," she said. He did not move. "Corvin, come here." He came. He stopped a pace off, the way he always did, and she reached out and took hold of his sleeve and pulled, and he came the rest of the way, and she put her hand flat on his chest and felt his heart going like a hammer under it. "Now listen to me," she said, "because I am going to say something and I want it said in this room, and not in a library at 4 o'clock. You did not kill her. I know that you have decided that you did, and I know I shall not shift it tonight, and I am not going to try, but you are not that powerful. No man is. You said a cruel thing in a quarrel, which is a thing that half the married people in England did that same evening, and she made a choice, and her heart failed her, and a fever took her, and none of that is your voice. You have given your mouth a great deal more credit than it deserves." His hand came up and closed on her wrist, very hard, and stayed there. "And I have a complaint of my own," said Rena, "and I have been holding it since January, and you are going to hear it now while you are down. You married me in a church, in front of 300 people, and you said 2 words, and you said them to the parson. You never said them to me. I stood at your elbow in my mother's dress with my hands full of somebody else's flowers, and you did not turn your head, and I have thought about that on more nights than I am going to admit to. Whatever you swore in that churchyard, you swore it to a woman who is dead, and you have kept it, and it has cost you 4 years, and it has cost me the first 4 months of my marriage. I am not asking you to break it, Rena. I am asking you to make me one that is newer. The Duke of Vaudrey stood in the middle of his dead son's nursery with his wife's hand flat on his chest and his own hand shut round her wrist, and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said her name again, and then he said the words. He said the whole of them, all of it, the having and the holding and the better and the worse and the sickness and the health, out loud. In that room, in a voice that broke in 2 places and did not stop either time, to a woman who was standing in front of him and looking at him while he did it. He got to the end. He did not let go of her wrist. There, said Rena, now it is a house. He made a sound she had never heard a man make. He did not take hold of her. He did not kiss her. He lifted her hand off his chest and turned it over and looked at it, at the glue under the nails that would not scrub out, at the small burn on the side of her thumb from the finishing iron, at the ring that had been too big in January and was not too big now. Then he bent his head and put his mouth against the inside of her wrist and held it there, and Rena stood in the dust with her free hand over her mouth and let him. Alowan Vaudrey was born at Alderhelm Hall at 4:20 in the morning on the 14th of October, after a night that Rena remembered afterwards in about 9 pieces and Mrs. Quintrell remembered every minute of until the day she died. It was hard, and it was long, and it was not, in the end, dangerous, and the physician from Kirkhallow said so twice at the time, and nobody in the room believed him either time. Lady Adeline was in the corridor from midnight. She would not sit. She sent her own manservant 3 miles for more ice at 2 in the morning, and she stood at the top of the stairs and told the Duke of Vaudrey to his face at 3:30 that he would either come away from that door or she would have him carried, and he did not come away, and she did not have him carried. And the 2 of them stood at that door together for the last 50 minutes without saying one word to one another. The child was a girl. There was a codicil, and the codicil wanted a boy, and the estate at Kirkhallow, and the lands at Cowles, and the whole of the northern rental went that morning to a man in Antigua, who never in his life found out what he had been given. Nobody in the room mentioned it. Not that day, not that week. Rena, who had done the arithmetic in a shop in October with her eyes open, waited 3 days for somebody to mention it, and no one did. And at the end of the 3rd day she asked him outright, and her husband looked up from the bundle in his arms with an expression of honest bewilderment and said, "I am sorry, what?" Lady Adeline left on the 20th. On the morning she went, she came up and stood at the end of the bed with her gloves in her hand. "I said a great many things to you in the small parlor in July. You did. I do not withdraw them. Most of them were true, and one of them was unforgivable, and I shall not insult you by pretending I have forgotten which." She put a small book down on the covers. It was old and badly rebound, and the leather at the spine had been done by somebody who did not know what they were about. That was my sister's. She was not clever, and she was not brave, and I loved her more than anything in my life, and I did tell her that winter, over and over, that a duchess without a son is nothing in this county. You were right. You were right in July, and I have not slept properly since, and I find that I do not resent you for it as much as I expected to, which is my own affair. Rena put her hand on the book. "I was wrong about one thing," said Lady Adeline. "Which?" I said. "He would go under." She drew on one glove. "He did not. I watched a man stand outside a door for 4 hours and stay in the world. And I have not seen that since my sister died, and I do not think it was the child that did it. She drew on the other. I shall come at Christmas. Do not make a fuss about the room." And she was gone before Rena could answer, which Rena came to understand was simply how the woman conducted the whole of her life. The thing about the tool she found in November. Aloan was 3 weeks old and sleeping in the day the way they do, and Rena went back to the library because her hands wanted something, and she opened her father's second chest, the fine set, the one that had come up from Netherbury in March, and she took out the tray to get at the finishing irons underneath. There was a paper folded under the tray. It was a pawnbroker's ticket from Kirkhallow, and it had her father's name on it, and it had the date of redemption written across the corner in a clerk's hand. The 19th of September. Rena sat down on the floor of the library with the ticket in her hand. September, not March when the chest had come up, not January when he married her. The 19th of September was the day after Halvard had ridden down to the shop and sat at the table and gone back up the hill with her refusal and his notebook, and asked to have the middle part said again so as to get the words right. She had said no to him on the 18th of September. On the 19th he had gone into a pawnbroker's shop in Kirkhallow and bought back a bookbinder's tools for a family that had just refused him, and had said nothing about it to anybody, and had let them sit in a case for 6 months, and had sent them up to her, in March, in among a chair and a stove and a case of gold leaf, so that she would never be able to pick out which of it was the one that mattered. She never asked him about it. She thought about it for a week, and then she put the ticket back under the tray and left it there, because she understood that the whole point of it, for him, was that it had not been said. Nyssa came up to Alderhelm at the beginning of December, 12 years old and taller by 3 inches, having spent the whole of the summer at the sea, which was in the settlement, and which nobody had ever explained to her. She got up the great staircase in one go, and stood at the top of it out of breath and furious about being out of breath, and she held her niece for an hour and a half by the library stove, and would not give her back. Rena watched her sister carry the child up and down in front of the new plaster on the north wall, and did not trust herself to say anything at all. She heard him for the first time on a night at the beginning of December. She had gone up late. There was snow coming down soft against the tall windows on the west landing, and the house was quiet in the way it only is under snow. And as she came along the corridor, she saw that the nursery door at the end was open, and there was firelight moving on the floor outside it. She stopped. It was very low, and it was not a good voice, and it was flat on the turn in the third line every time. Rena Vaudry stood in the cold corridor in her nightgown with her hand on the wall and listened to her husband singing a weaving song from a valley he had never lived in to a daughter, 3 weeks old, who had cost him the whole of the northern rental, and she did not go in. She stood there until he had got to the end of it. Then she went to her own room and shut the door and got into bed, and lay a long while in the dark listening to the snow, and thought that there are 2 kinds of quiet in a house, and that it had taken her a year to learn the difference, and that she would not have believed on the morning she was married that she would ever be glad of either. In the morning she said nothing about it. She poured his coffee and he drank it, and they talked about the West Range gutter, which had gone again. She never told him she had heard. That was the whole of it.